Hello. Thanks for another great week working through the American Revolution. As you can see, recent historians have uncovered a great amount of information to add about the role of women and families and what they have done to help create that great political revolution taking place in North America in the late 18th century. For framing purposes, it's important for you to understand what a monumental paradigm shift the American Revolution brought to human history. It is ranked among the greatest of all revolutions in human history, simply because it made the common notion that people and not God should be responsible for selecting their government and their own leadership. Moreover, the American Revolution set in place the simple principle that all sovereign, united countries should have governing documents that are written down, a constitution of laws and rights ratified by the people who will live under those laws. And most importantly, I'll stress again, they should be written down so that the people can ultimately become literate and read them, and that Constitution can be a living document, and be amended. I think we sadly take all of this for granted now, that revolution in historical terms happened relatively recently, but truly it was a time revolutionary at the time, a revolution on par with the domestication of plants and animals, simply because it impacted so many people's lives. So enough about the importance of the overall revolution. This week there were many issues to address, not only in women's history, but in the history of the revolution. And I was glad to see the very systematic approach to tackling these questions that some of the students took, such as Dora and Stephanie, Jeanette, and Thomas. In an online class, sometimes we just have to cover material and get through it. These students did a good job at addressing many abstract questions in a concise and direct manner, very systematically. We also, in an online upper level class, have to look at primary sources from the era to see the rhetoric and to try to understand the language. Many of you did a good job working with the discussion number 2 this week, which required you to look at key primary sources. And I also really appreciated April's post. She inserted 2 photographs of Phyllis Wheatley and Esther Reed, which added so much depth and texture to this unit. So please take a look at April's post in discussion number 2. Rosemary Zagari showed us how women did respond to the call to be part of the revolution. And she did this with profound success. And she is a great example of one of the new social historians. Women formed groups, as many of you noted, such as the Daughters of Liberty. They formed spinning bees, made homespun, brewed Liberty teas. Many of you absolutely got this. All of these products made in the colonies were considered rougher and not as refined as the better products that would have been imported from Europe. Displaying these products was a badge of honor in the colonies, and women showed support for homemade colonial products. Their support of this movement was unquantifiable. Women also identified merchants who did not support the revolutionary cause with great success. Oftentimes, Such merchants were castigated, and indeed, in the city of Boston, considered the locus of revolutionary activity, such merchants could face brutal beatings. The war also impacted women's daily lives, as all wars do. The Revolutionary War was not special in this regard. Many posts did an excellent job addressing this issue. Jessie noted a simple but profound theme in her post, which was that women during the Revolution had the ability to adapt. And this will go back to something we've been talking about. Women showed during the Revolution the absolute ability to move from the private to the public sphere, and I thought Jessie's post really spoke to this. We must remember that the American Revolution is essentially a political revolution, but women were able to take control of the rhetoric because they dominated multiple micro-local economies. Jessie notes also that women adapted to the lack of presence of men. They always do during war. Men who went off to fight. During this time, women wrestled with disease and dislocation while maintaining their traditional roles. And this was profoundly true, with shortages, inflation, epidemics such as smallpox, which was rampant throughout the colonies, and other deprivations. Most women were forced to merge their personal and political spheres. Men were called away to serve, and women continued to do their usual work in towns and brought the legal, broader, and economic business home with them. For example, women managed the slaves and the servants, which was typically work that was reserved for men. Women experienced long periods of being alone, and many published essays and documented this patriotism they brought to the cause. The concept of voting was also used as a rhetorical device to exclude gender and also race. Zingari talks about a woman named Elizabeth Alexander Stevens in Essex County, New Jersey. Stevens was just one example of a person who could vote based on the amount of property that she held. Remember, as women increasingly experienced widowhood and took control of their husband's property, they also received the right to vote. The last state where women held this right was the state of New Jersey until 1807, when New Jersey was the last state to fully disenfranchise women and free blacks who held property. Prior to this, voting was a privilege of property holding, not considered a natural right. LaShawn suggested that property rights disenfranchised women more than anything. Women during this time had property because of mere widowhood or being unmarried. I appreciated this observation of LaShawn's. It was people such as Thomas Jefferson who changed the rhetoric around voting from being a privilege of property holding to being a natural right. LaShawn reminds us that voting should be a practical right too. If one owned property, one had a vested interest in voting in a way that would protect one's property. For instance, voting so roads might be closer to get your crops into town. Voting so streets might have street lights to protect your property so you could see at night. Voting so mail might get delivered to your home easier. So women might vote differently on these issues of property rights, property protection, than would men. So it would serve one to think that exclusively allowing men to vote in this realm might benefit them better. Sandra and Heather's post echoed some of LaShawn's sentiments. Heather in particular started a fascinating thread, and I encourage you all to read it. She notes a profound contradiction at the heart of republicanism. Is voting tied to property, or is voting a natural right? This, as you know, will crop up repeatedly and essentially cause a great civil war, as founders enshrine the enslaved race in the Constitution, writing it because they keep insisting that all of a sudden voting is a natural right. But if it is a natural right, everyone should be allowed to vote, not just white males. So you see, they're causing quite a problem for themselves. Finally, a few of the posts address some of these contradictions further, and quite well. Brandon's free but not free thread is an outstanding analysis of Zagari, where he points out the inherent rhetorical contradictions of the Revolution. That the colonists felt like slaves to Great Britain, but that slavery is the opposite of the state of liberty that they sought. His post sparked a few excellent comments by Ciara, Jesse, and LaShawn. In other words, there is an inherent hypocrisy in declaring yourself a slave to a political entity and a country when you're holding a portion of humanity in bondage. This did not escape many of the founders. A few other discussions touched on this essential theme too, so take a look at Dora's thread too. It's another great discussion on this same theme. That's enough for now. Many of you have already handed in the short paper. Thank you for that. If you have not handed it in, the paper is due on September 7th in a few days. I'll begin grading them this weekend, and I'll get them back to you pretty quick. It's time to begin preparing for the short midterm quiz, and there will be a study guide posted. There is no surprise to this quiz. The quiz is made up exactly from the study guide. It's all open note and open resource. Study with the review sheet and know what's on the review sheet, and you will do fine opening your notes and opening all the resources. You're on your honor to take the quiz in 90 minutes and then just turn it in the assignment folder. Thanks for another great week. Email me with any questions, and I will see you in the threads.